right at the beginning of the First World War, a new weapon was unleashed upon the world, one that we didn't even see coming because it wasn't a gun or a bomb or anything we thought of as a weapon. And yet it changed the face of warfare forever, separating those countries that had it from those who didn't. And it allowed for the raising, movement, and devastation of armies that up until that point were unimaginable in size and scale. History buffs might know exactly what I'm talking about, and that is accountants. Accountants, bookkeepers, bureaucrats. See, never before in history had armies of such size existed. They dwarfed anything that, like, say, Napoleon was able to muster. Because now, there were detailed accounts of exactly how many soldiers, how much food they needed, the exact distance to travel, and the supply lines necessary, and the estimated ammunition expenditure. We had reached a new stage as countries and intelligences that could conduct warfare on another level, total warfare. All of these things could be calculated on a great scale, one that was greater than ever before. Only aided by more long-range communication devices, and by being able to plan and account for nearly everything resource-wise, at this scale changed how battles worked ever since. So why would I start an Age of Sigmar lore series with a terribly, obviously simplified history lesson, right? If you are a fan of history like I am, you know that there were a lot of things going on, but that's just one of the many things that made World War I so crazy. Because the subject of this next series of the Ossiarch Bonereapers, the core of them is what we just talked about, but magnified to an insane scale. We're talking about these Bonereapers, and if I had to sum up their superpower, because remember, every battle tome makes their army seem unstoppable, I'd say it was calculating, right? They are a calculating faction, and that is what they bring to the mortal realms in a way that is mind-blowing. And when that strange weapon of being, exacting and calculating operates in a world where time is irrelevant for them, they are undead, they have infinite time to do whatever they need to do, backed by power and the mission of a literal god. We'll see what that does to the realms. Now, it is said that the Ossiarch Bonereapers are a direct response by Nagash to the Stormcast Eternals, right? They're his Stormcast Eternals. Sigmar made his warrior constructs, doing his thing, playing with souls and mortals, and now Nagash is doing the same thing. And while there is some truth to that, what we'll learn is that the Ossiarch Bonereapers appearing is definitely a response to an escalation. No, he wants to fight the Sigmar, and he has his own army to do so. But we learn much more than that, right? That these constructs of bone and mishmash souls was a plan set in motion long before the Stormcast Eternals. That the eternity-long plan to end all life in the realms under Nagash's rule was one that he began back in the Age of Myth. When you are timeless and driven in the way that Nagash is, you can have plots and schemes that take millennia, and the Ossiarch Bonereapers were always a part of that plan. And this may seem like a vague and crazy backstory, but if you imagine, if you will, a different AOS timeline. It's the Age of Myth. Chaos doesn't come into the realms, at least not in the same force that it did, and suddenly, breaking from every gate that leads to Shyish, Throne of Death, the colossal demigods stroll out and begin conquering everything, starting with the realm gates, and then moving on to bigger campaigns. Alright, and then what I just described is like a weird twist on the actual lore, right? Where Stormcast came out of the gates to Azir and did the same thing, but in this alternate story, there's no Stormcast. Those towering figures from the realm gates were the Ossiarch Bonereapers, coming from the realm of death rather than the realm of heavens. Because that was the plan that Nagash had in the Age of Myth. Someday, my legions will stroll forth, right? Just constructs that are meant to instill my will upon the realms. But the problem with that plan is it didn't account for chaos. He couldn't see how things were going to go down in the Age of Chaos, but the seeds of that army construction, the plans that he laid out to just kind of basically autopilot build an army in the background were already laid. Now, to aid in this endeavor, Nagash did come up with subplots meant to process things along faster rather than actually be endgame strategy. So what I mean is, you have an army that's supposed to go around and conquer and kill everybody, but what if I had, say, a giant black pyramid with a spell that would kill a lot of people? That would speed up your end game, right? It would certainly quicken up your reaching of your goal. And so that's what we find out the black pyramid was. It was one, they emphasized it very carefully, one of these kind of subplots interwoven into his greater plan, of which the Bonereapers are the finality. So definitely, in a sense, yes, they are the Stormcast equivalent for death, but their roots stretch much deeper in time than the Warriors of Azir. So moving from the aerial view, what are the Ossiarch Bonereapers, practically speaking? Well, they are an army of undead constructs with a singular mission: exterminate life in the realms over the millennia. Right, this is a long game. I can't emphasize enough how much everything in this book references the long game. Rather than being a wisp of death magic bound to a simple skeleton like the average necromancer can do, imagine using the porous material of bone, condensing it into its hard as metal, and then shaping it like it's clay. Right? It's with this material that the legions of the Bonereapers are built. They're not raised skeletons, but they're constructs molded from skeletal materials. And this goes for the soul in each warrior as well. It's not one soul that's bound to a warrior. Made from small shards of grave sand, right, the realm stone of the realm of death, each Ossiarch Bonereaper warrior has a gem pendant acting as kind of like a soul trap. But no ordinary soul would do for Nagash. So what he did was he took the best and brightest from the land of death and tore their souls apart. And taking things he wanted, like intelligence, battle prowess, military experience, and disposing of the rest, things like memories, compassion, and honor. Each and every Ossiarch Bonereaper is a new being, right? A patchwork of skills, values, and personalities from several of the realm's greatest warriors. And one thing that is unique about them, even in more so than their souls and how it's attached to a body, is their autonomy. You see, each Ossiarch Bonereaper has some measure of free will and thought, just enough to fulfill their mission. And in this way, Nagash uses the best parts of each leader to the fullest, right? Instead of the waves of mindless dead that just stalk the realms, these soldiers can be disciplined and focused, yet still solve problems and approach enemies with a measure of creativity. They can set traps, they can outsmart their opponents because they have this little bit of free will. Now, this isn't because Nagash values free will. In fact, the opposite is true. He despises it. But he sees the utility in having someone who can think for themselves on the fly in battle. And on that note of thinking outside the box, let's talk about their society. These guys have no time limit on the domination of the realms. So, very slowly, they have eked out of Shyish. And how they'll do that is they'll enter a region and construct something called a bone tithe nexus, and then go to each of the surrounding villages, empires, groups, whatever you want to call them, in a massive area, right? Just think of like going to a country around a specific point and demand tribute. Because when a Bonereaper army shows up, they generally don't just attack, right? A small contingent will be sent to negotiate with whatever civilization they come across, and they might sound very civil and very kind to them, like they are willing to cooperate and work together with others, and that is simply not true. This is the cold calculation that I talked about when we started, because it's kind of simple math. They need bone material to expand their armies, build fortresses and that kind of stuff. By keeping towns alive, they can collect the bones of the dead from them for, in theory, many generations. Thus, the bone tithe was born. These leaders that come to parlay do so with an offer. Give us your dead and a seasonal offering of bones that you bring to the bone tithe nexus, or we kill you now and take what you have now. So understand, this is not two societies working together. These are farmers keeping an orchard growing, right? So he can reap the harvest of apples over time, fail to pay the tithe, the exact amount based on your civilization's size, and you die. They don't perceive living things in the realms as like other worthy races. They are resources to be harvested. And here's the thing is, it's kind of understood that this arrangement really ends one way, right? At some point, could be a generation from now or so, you won't be able to pay the tithe, and the full might of Nagash's chosen will descend upon you. And so that's how they function, constantly fighting off chaos and destruction, collecting bones, enforcing the bone tithe, going to more civilized folks with an offer that they dare not refuse, all in an effort to collect raw materials to build and expand, and to do the same thing elsewhere. This is, in essence, the longest of the long games, and really hammering home why I started this series on their calculating nature as the defining characteristic of the army. They come into an area, they assess how many bones a society can muster in a given year, and then calculate how many more warriors that will enable them to build, or how big their fortifications, also made from bone, like molded from that kind of bone material, need to be, when they'll need to expand, and how much they need to collect to do so. Factoring in how many cities can be tithed, again, use math, again, to calculate every aspect of their world domination. All of it can be plotted out, accounted for, and logistically dominated. These are militant accountants dead set on conquest, and without restriction of death or time, it's the longest of the long games to see it done. But Nagash knew it took more than just math and a plan to make it all happen. And that's where Katja Krause, Mortarch of the Necropolis, comes in. Now, here's the thing. I was actually kind of blown away when I read this book. So, he is the defining spirit of the armies of the Ossiarch Bonereapers. And in fact, a majority of this battle tome, I feel like, is centered around him specifically. Just like Sigmar is incomplete without Gal Miraz, the Ossiarch Bonereapers were not ready for prime time, meaning to be sent out into war, until Katja Krause was returned to them, which he was since the events of the Necroquake. And since so much lore is dedicated to this one figure, we're going to cover him in a dedicated video. Because he and the rest of this army are just so intertwined, he kind of needs his own video. And so stepping back, again, this is my introduction to the faction to get you excited for it. I mean, just to kind of give you a sense of how big of a villain they're supposed to be. So why are the Ossiarch Bonereapers cool? We'll say this at the top, just to give us a sense of what the rest of the series is going to be like. And the things I want to stress in this video are what make them unique, right? That they are a perfectly ordered and structured army, calculating in the extreme, constructed from body to soul, with the purpose of serving Nagash. And their plan may seem silly, because they are entering the fray so late into the fight for the mortal realms, but they really embody Nagash's mind when it comes to the end game, right? Nagash sets plans in place that can take eons, because time means nothing. So starting the construction of an army that takes hundreds of years to get ready isn't out of place for him. The way they conduct themselves, they're slowly growing in numbers, and this slow grip of control, regularly tithing bones from nearby societies, isn't that odd when you think about them as being farmers of an orchard rather than a society trying to work with others. So it's hard to break my mind from the immediate victory to see the long game, right? We read the Rumgate Wars, and we're like, yes, they closed the door, right? It feels like they accomplished something. And Nagash is over on the other side being like, so what happens to that door in 2,000 years, right? Because he's just thinking on a different level. We see the immediate, and he sees the ultimate endgame. And one thing I'm always leery of with new armies is how they survive the Age of Chaos, right? So Nagash started these plans in the Age of Myth, when things were groovy with the other gods. Where were they during the Age of Chaos when Nagash got punked by Archaon? Well, and the book kind of addresses this really with two different ways. So one is that they weren't ready, right? Sigmar had Azira locked up for hundreds of years and let chaos reign. He had to wait because the moment he debuted with his super soldiers, meaning the Stormcast Eternals, he knew the heat was going to be turned up, which is exactly what happened, right? Chaos then responded in kind with an escalation. Likewise, the construction and harvesting we are talking about for this army takes an immense amount of time, and rather than show his hand too soon, Nagash was perfectly fine. Again, long game, eternal long game, was happy to wait in the rest of undeath while his realm fell to pieces, and he would then use this army, when it's ready, to reclaim it. Now, the second reason we were given for why they didn't show up till now is because they needed a leader. So right at the start of the Age of Chaos, Katja Krause was taken from Nagash. Again, we'll cover that more in his own video. But like I said before, he kind of is the heart and soul of this army. He turns it from a bunch of accountants and assembly-lined soldiers into a deadly weapon of Shyish made manifest. They didn't have the numbers or the leadership until now to show up. So during the Age of Chaos, while the realms descended into madness and Azir was starting to raise a new army, the Ossiarch Bonereapers were still being built and assembled, waiting for the day when they had the might and the leadership to bring the will of Nagash on the realms. It's a fascinating story, and just like every other battle tome, I don't read every detail, and this is because, specifically, I want you to go grab the book if it interests you and read more for yourself and see the art. There's a lot of cool stuff here. So friends, as we dive into Ossiarch Bonereapers, what are your thoughts on the faction? What are things you like? What are things you don't like? Let me know in the comments down below, and I will catch you there. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming.